Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Clinical Pharmacist podcast. Today, we've got a really interesting topic. It's all about the IP qualification and beyond. We've got a lovely guest with us today, Amina Ali, who is an experienced GP pharmacist working in primary care since 2019. She's also an independent prescriber, currently working in the Enfield area. Amina is also undertaking an additional master's qualification to become an advanced clinical practitioner. And she's also been a guest lecturer at King's University to talk about her area of expertise, which is older people, frailty, and polypharmacy. Welcome, Amina. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Rina.
It's our pleasure. And of course, we've got my lovely colleague, Sarah, who is also an experienced pharmacist and also an independent prescriber. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, thank you.
Right. Okay. So let's get straight into it. Let's start with, and if you don't mind, if you can tell us a little bit about your career progression, how you developed, as a pharmacist in primary care and how you got to where you are now.
It's probably safe to say I haven't really had an orthodox progression in terms of my career because I've had babies in between, kind of interrupted all of that. But I have probably jumped a few steps just simply because of, the way I've approached things and the way I am in my role. And so I started off actually in hospital. So I did my pre-reg in hospital, loved it, got really, really good training there. And alongside that, since I've been in uni, I've always worked in community. So I've always had that on the side. So once I qualified, I continued to work in community alongside anything else I was doing. So whilst I was in hospital, I was still working in community on the weekend. And so I spent a lot of time in hospital and in community services as well. And that's when I first got into Frailty and older people. Because of working in the community, you tend to deal with mostly the older population in those kind of services. And then I worked in intermediate care. Again, that was a lot of older people in Frailty. And that is what then led me into primary care. Because when I was working in intermediate care, I worked very closely with a GP practice who covered our medical services within our intermediate care units, directly into primary care as a GP pharmacist. So the first role I got, believe it or not, in primary care was as a lead pharmacist for a wonderful team that worked in Greenwich. We covered about 23 practices, so we covered quite a lot of area. We had about 7 to 8 pharmacists. With three seniors, I was one of the seniors. I helped co-manage that group, and I learned an awful lot during that period. I also completed my IP during that period as well. And most of my experience in primary care came from that role. And then I decided I wanted to return back to Enfield and have been continuing in primary care since then.
Okay, fantastic. Sarah?
So obviously you decided to do IP as a lead pharmacist.
Well, I have to.
So it would be good to find out basically how you found the supervision process was while you were doing your IP. How much support did you have around you? And did that influence how soon you were able to use your IP once you qualified and how you actually used your IP? So I think right now, a lot of pharmacists out there are quick jumping on the gun to get their IP done because soon all pharmacists are going to be coming out of university, ready with that qualification. Some people get their IP done. I don't think they'll know exactly when they should start prescribing, how they should start prescribing. Do they only prescribe in the area that they, specialized in? Is it safe for them to do so? Do they need more training? Do they have the support? There's so many questions out there. I think what people should be trying to avoid and probably want to avoid is using it too quickly, making mistakes, or not using it at all. Because it's at the same time, why did you gain this qualification if you're not prepared to use the skill? So it'd be good to know your experience. Because from what I know about you, you are very confident in your prescribing. You've been a prescriber for 3 years now. How did you overcome that, challenge basically, and how have you found it?
I think it's really important to stress that your confidence will come from the level of supervision that you receive. So whilst you're doing your IP, it's really, really important to select a DMP, that's a GP or a doctor, who is going to support you, and he's going to have the time to actually spend with you to build on your knowledge and your experience to be able to be a competent IP. Okay. As a co-manager of a team of several pharmacists, we were covering many surgeries, and I can tell you there's a lot of variability out there about how much support each pharmacist was getting from their DMP. So it was our pharmacists were really lucky in the sense that they had us as senior pharmacists to kind of supplement that support. And, as seniors, we could go in there and speak to the GPs and say, "How, by the way, do you think spend a little bit of extra time with this person, or can we, negotiate a schedule or whatever?" We had the confidence and the authority to do that, but a pharmacist working on their own, doing an IP off their own back, may not be able to have those conversations and negotiate in that way. And you need to be really sure that you want to do the IP at that particular place and that you're going to get the support to do it. Okay, because when you're doing your IP, the clinical expertise is not taught to you. The clinical expertise comes from your vocational experience, what you're doing on the job, what you're learning from your GPs and your other healthcare professionals working as an MDT. And I have to say, trial and error sometimes. A lot of medicine is trial and error. Yes, we have guidelines and protocols and things that you have to follow, but at the end of the day, it's no clinical judgment. Which is a bit that I think pharmacists struggle with a little bit. When you think about the way a pharmacist works, we're almost a safety net for everyone else, aren't we? We're at the end of the process. Someone's produced a prescription, you're there and you're clinically screening that prescription. The ultimate person who's responsible for prescribing it is still the prescriber. And you can get into hot water if you haven't screened it properly, but the ultimate responsibility of prescribing that medicine lies with the prescriber. Then you have to put yourself into those shoes. If you are the prescriber, you are legally responsible and accountable for every decision that you make. If a decision goes awry, you need to be able to justify clinically why you made that decision. And you can't rely on, but the doctor always does it that way. Not every patient is going to fit into those neat little boxes, nice guidance for hypertension, You have to be able to justify why you did what you did. The only way to get to a point where you feel confident and comfortable and competent to do that is by practicing really, really good supervision. You can't just get in your IP and be like, "Yeah, I'm going to run out there and prescribe it." Legally, you can. Legally, there's nothing stopping you prescribing fentanyl to a little old lady. But do you know the effects of fentanyl on your lady? You need to know these things before you prescribe it. You need to anticipate what might happen to that patient and you need to safety net that patient. Prescribing is not just about finding a prescription. There's so much more that comes with it. There's the assessment, the diagnosis, the investigations, your review of the investigation. What's your impression? What do you think is going on? And how are you going to monitor this patient and follow them up?
So let's say now, after you've qualified, was there anything else you did? So aside from having a supervisor, that was really helpful and good, and you learned a lot from the clinical team around you. Did you sort of invest in any training yourself? Did you go out and do some reading? Did you put time in for areas that weren't your specialist area during your course? So did you invest in training to kind of help upskill yourself and give yourself the knowledge to safely prescribe as well once you'd qualified?
Yeah. So what usually happens with an IP, and it was the case when I did it, is you choose an area. Okay. So when you're doing your qualification is specific to a certain area of competency. Okay. So for example, for me, it was hypertension. Now, hypertension is a tiny part of the care that we provide in primary care. But that is only to test your competence, because there's no way for any institution to be able to say you're competent in prescribing everything. So you have to narrow it down. You have to show that you are able to follow a process, you're able to follow a system, that you have a thought process of how you clinically reason something. So you choose an area of competency and you work really, really hard to get really, really good in that area and show your competence in that area. But once you're qualified, legally, you can prescribe anything. Okay? So if you are going to prescribe something that's outside of the competency that you've learned, then of course, you need to go out of your way to get that knowledge. If that means speaking to a doctor, if that means looking something up, if that means looking at what the local policy is, what the national policy is, what the evidence base is, you need to be able to justify why you're going to prescribe something. So when you say, what do you do when you become a prescriber? How do you get into it? I would say, first of all, before you become a prescriber, you should already be practicing. So if you're in primary care and you're assessing patients, you would have the authority on the system to be able to generate a prescription. You just can't sign it. Okay? So that prescription is going to be signed by a doctor at the end of the day, but you're generating that prescription. So already you're getting into the mode of, this is how I'm going to behave as a prescriber. So that's how you're getting your practice in. But you've got the safety net that the GP is going to sign that prescription. Okay. So really, you should already be having advanced conversations with the GP to say, are you happy for me to prescribe opioids? Are you happy for me to prescribe this? What limitations do you want to put in place? You know, do you want me to do any additional training to be able to prescribe this so that you can safely sign prescriptions? Because let's be realistic, every prescription that you generate, the GP is not going to look at with a fine-tooth comb. They're trusting you. So if you're going to ask someone else to sign a prescription, you better be sure you've done it right. You know. So that's where you build up your experience, you build up your knowledge. And what I would say is, don't be in a rush. Don't be in a rush. Don't see patients that are above your competency or presenting with symptoms that you have no idea what they are, or dealing with a long-term condition that you haven't, updated the knowledge on. If you're not good at diabetes, don't do diabetes patients. Don't do things because you're under pressure to do them. Do things because you know that you can do them well, or at least you can get help to do them. When you first qualify, you need to take easy steps to build up your confidence. Start off with the area of competency that you've got in your IP, and then you start to move into areas where you're not as confident, but there's plenty of reading, there's plenty of resources, there's plenty of guidelines out there. And in primary care, so you have access, especially have a question in, for example, endocrinology. You can pick up the phone, call them up, local hospital for advice and guidance, speak to endocrinologists. You have a service called Consultant Connect. You call up and you get an endocrinologist who's somewhere in the country, doesn't have to be a local one, and you can discuss it with them, and that's how you build on your knowledge.
Yeah, I was going to say, I remember I specialize in type 2 diabetes, but my first ever prescription that I signed was ferrous sulfate. And for me, I think it was, I felt competent, and I probably, at that time could prescribe in diabetes, but I still felt like I needed further training. So I did start on kind of some simple ailment type things, because I felt like these are things we can recommend maybe even as a pharmacist in community, or we were aware of them back then before we even were prescribers. But I suppose for me to gain confidence, I trained myself up on those sort of things. I remember ferrous sulfate being my first one. And then after that, I started hypertension was another one that I felt really, really comfortable with. I actually then rebuilt myself back up to diabetes. And I think that was kind of because I wasn't getting enough practice at one point, so I was seeing more hypertension. So I was reading more hypertension guidelines. I was doing, any trainings I could find on hypertension. And then I became comfortable with up titrating patients on, antihypertensive. So I felt like for me, it was like I was doing area by area that were related. So it was like cardiovascular disease. Then I, started doing those. And then I moved on to respiratory. I did some training, read guidelines, understood, the clinical physiology of asthma, before, to understand how the drugs were working and, what impact they were having. And I learned so much, but it enabled me to then feel confident that I was prescribing correctly for patients. That was my experience. I don't know, Runa, if you remember your first prescription.
I can't remember actually. I did my IP qualification. My focus was on asthma. So I think, Amina, just touching back on what you said, it's important to have a really good DMP. So I think I was quite lucky in that sense. My supervisor was very supportive. So I had a lot of experience actually, seeing a lot of asthmatic patients. So I did mine in asthma. So that was the area that I initially focused on. And since it's, the respiratory area, naturally you would move on to the next thing, which was COPD. And then I think, probably hypertension was the next one that I moved on to, and then diabetes last. So Sarah, you were quite brave to choose diabetes as your specialist area. It's quite a wide area. But absolutely agree with, the advice that both of you have given, very comprehensive advice. So just to chime in on that as well, it's, focus on one disease area at a time. As Amina, you said, there's no need to rush. You're absolutely right in that, gaining the qualification in itself does not provide you with, the clinical skill to prescribe in other disease areas. And even that disease area that you've sort of focused on during your IP qualification, sometimes you may not be, sort of confident enough to go out and start prescribing. You have to build yourself up slowly. And I think this is probably a big misconception amongst, I think, especially pharmacists who are not yet in the primary care sector. First of all, they might think that you can only work in the primary care sector if you have an IP qualification, which is a misconception. We know that there are, hundreds of pharmacists working in primary care, delivering great value as non-IPs. So that's number one. And the other common misconception is that some pharmacists who are not yet in the primary care sector, they think that if they've got their IP qualification, they can just come in and just start prescribing in all sorts of areas. And both of you have, explained that that's not the case. So I think it's really important that, first of all, you don't have to wait until you get your IP qualification. I think it might be, a really good idea if you are interested in, transitioning into this sector. Come in anyway without your IP qualification, get some experience as a non-prescriber. And there are so many different things you can do as a non-prescriber. You can reauthorize medications, you can do medication reviews, might even be able to do some up and down titrating of the chronic conditions. If you're competent in those areas, and if the lead prescribers in the practice are happy for you to do so, because we know that nurses do that all the time as well. And that was well before pharmacists came into the picture. But I think, come in, not necessarily with your IP qualification. And then once you are in, you might have better, opportunities to actually find a DMP that you like, or a DPP who might actually agree to be your supervisor. And through that relationship that you developed, you may be able to go on and, apply for your IP qualification. And then while you're in practice and studying at the same time, everything, because we know sometimes just having all theory is difficult. So if you're already working in practice, I think you can get so much out of your course. So yeah, that's the advice that I would give. Amina, any other advice that you would give?
I think, it's really important to stress that, look, pharmacists, our nature is that we're quite methodical, in the sense that we like to follow SOP, we like to follow guidance. And there's a lot of guidance and policies and protocols out there that we can follow. But when you are an IP, you are autonomous, you are responsible, and you are accountable for your decisions. So blindly following a protocol because that's what the protocol says, if it's not clinically appropriate for your patient, it's not justified. You have to get into practice and into the mode of being able to make really good clinical decisions and being able to justify about the clinical reasoning. Okay, that's really, really important. You can't get into the mode of saying, well, I gave fulvastatin because that's what the policy says. That's not clinical reasoning and clinical justification. You have to be able to say why that was appropriate for this particular patient. The other thing that's important is communication between you and your colleagues. So that's including your GP. So constantly communicate with your GP where you're at, what you're feeling comfortable with. So what we used to do with our pharmacists is once they got their IP, we would sit down with the pharmacist and we would sit down with their advisor and we'd have this list, and it literally just followed the BNF chapters. And we would say, right, happy to prescribe, exclusion, all this kind of stuff. Literally going through the BNF. I'm not talking page by page, I'm talking chapters and drug groups. So if the IP wasn't confident in prescribing opioids, you would say you're not confident. Is there any extra work you need to do in this area? Yeah, I need to do this. That's how detailed you need to go. And thirdly, sorry, Bruna, I really want people to have the confidence to say no. Okay, this is a skill in itself. Any good doctor worth their salt will say to you, the decision to do nothing sometimes is not only the hardest decision, but it's the best decision for that patient. So when that patient comes in and they've already Googled what's wrong with them and they've already Googled what their treatment is and they're asking for it and you assess them and you don't agree with their opinion, you have to be able to have the confidence to say no and justify why you're saying no. Do not feel pressurized to prescribe, not just from the patient, but from your colleagues. So if you come into primary care and you're already in IP and your doctor or your practice manager is saying to you, yes, I'd like you to assign all the repeat prescriptions. Remember something, you are legally accountable and responsible for those prescriptions. So it doesn't matter if someone else is consulted and someone else has set that prescription up. If you're signing it, you're responsible. But don't sign other people's prescriptions. Be responsible for your own work. Make that very, very clear when you come into the role. That's what's going to happen. You'll only be responsible for your own work, your own decisions, your own signing, your own prescriptions. To do med reviews, that's not a problem. But do not fall under the pressure of signing batch prescriptions for other prescribers.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think if you do have an IP, you have to be careful about what sort of role you're applying for as well and the responsibility that you're taking on. So if you're not confident and you've got no experience in, actually utilizing your prescribing qualification, I think you need to be careful about what sort of roles you apply for. So maybe don't apply for a role that expects you to utilize that skill. And also, perhaps you've gone into a role where you may not have necessarily have applied for that, but because they've later on found out that you're a prescriber, then they start giving you those responsibilities. I think you need to have that conversation with your employers, just to let them know that, look, I am a prescriber. However, I'm not yet confident to use that. I just need some time. And maybe just let them know, as you said, provide them perhaps with a list of all the things that you can do, some of the things that you can't do, and maybe even, use this as an opportunity to discuss some of the areas that you'd like a little bit of support with, and they might be happy to, because the more value you can provide the practice, the better it is for them. So sometimes it may just be something as simple as, an hour or two session with the GP, and then, you're sort of good to go under their supervision. So you can also use that as an opportunity for further development as well.
Sarah made a really good point, and it just reminds me of something that my DMP said to me. And he said to me, it's all about exposure. So if you're exposed to a particular clinical area over and over and over and over and over again, that's when you get good at it. So seeing one diabetic patient once in a while, you're going to be a bit behind on diabetes because you haven't had the exposure. You haven't seen all the different types of diabetes patients there are. The same blood doesn't fit everybody. You have to provide person-centered, tailoring kind of medication. So it's all about exposure. So give yourself a chance to be exposed and to experience and to learn from every single interaction that you have. I know we're focusing on IP right now, but I cannot stress enough, you need to hone your consultation skills, people. Hone your consultation skills. Because without really good consultation skills, what's the point of your IP? How are you going to get through your assessment? How are you going to get to the point where, the patient is actually, disclosing the right information to you? You may need to be able to ask the right questions in the right way to get the information you need to be able to make that prescribing decision.
Yeah, definitely. I think, a really good point you make there. Sometimes as pharmacists in the community sector, we sometimes lack that skill because we've just not had that experience. I think a medication review in primary care is absolutely, completely different to, medicine's use review. And so there are some, really great guidance and training out there. So I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. Don't underestimate that skill. It's the foundation and the core of, the skill that you need in primary care. Okay, Amina, so I know you're currently doing your master's for the Advanced Clinical Practitioner course. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What's it been like? What sort of skills does it teach you? Because I know not all prescribers actually go on to do that course. What are some of the benefits of that course?
So I'm studying to be an ACP, which is an Advanced Clinical Practitioner. I'm absolutely loving it. Being back at uni, look at this again. The skills it teaches you, it depends on what semester you're in. So the initial semester I did was all about physical assessment still. So this is probably an area where pharmacists do probably lack, because traditionally, pharmacists generally don't touch their patients, but as an ACP, you have to. So, you learn how to do a cardiac assessment, respiratory assessment, abdominal assessment, MSK, neurological, I could go on. You learn about physical assessment skills, but you also learn about why do you do that assessment. So when you're listening to the chest, what is it that you're listening for? What does that sound mean? What does that crackle mean? How that fits into the clinical pathology, and how that then leads on to your treatment plan and what we want to do with that patient. So that's part of it. The other part of it is to learn sort of about how do you apply local policies, how do you apply your knowledge of pathology to the way we prescribe and the way that we treat people. And then the other part of the course is all about quality improvement. So I haven't started that bit yet, but it will be about choosing a quality improvement topic and literally just running with it. So that, in a nutshell, is what the ASVP course is. And the reason I chose to do it is because it is a natural progression from what I'm doing. I'm already practicing at an advanced level, but I felt like I was prescribing in areas where if I had to do an additional assessment or physically examine the patient, I wasn't competent to do so. So if I'm going to prescribe bisoprolol for a patient, which is a very common medication, I should be able to listen to the heart now. I should be able to tell it, if that patient has suddenly got on AF or something. I should be able to do that. And that's sort of coming back to me. But if I'm prescribing medication in these areas and I'm not able to fully assess the patient, should I be prescribing? And that was a personal question I asked myself. And I didn't feel comfortable because I was prescribing with a really wide scope. And I was also prescribing specialist medicine. And I felt that in order to make my practice safe, I needed to do this course and become more confident in terms of diagnostics, investigation, safety netting, monitoring, all of that kind of stuff, in order to be safe in what I do and to keep my patients safe. That's fun.
Okay, thank you. And I think, as you said, physical assessment is a big area that pharmacists lack, and this course provides you with exactly that. So I think it's probably really handy for if you're doing something like minor illness clinics. And some pharmacists might be wondering, are there any alternatives? Which from my experience, there are. So the Advanced Clinical Practitioner Program is quite a long program. There are sort of fast track versions where they're focusing just for minor illness clinics for a prescriber who's gained their IP qualification, where they do focus on physical assessment. It might be a couple of weekends, for example, but it's really intense, and it's only in just a short period of time. And I think that alone, going with that and, using that information and that knowledge to practice may not be as safe, especially if you don't have a GP to supervise your work. So I think if you're not opting for the ACP program, and minor illness and physical assessment is the area you want to go into, I think if you are doing a course, just make sure that you've got, a GP supervising you for a while, while you're seeing a wide range of conditions. It could be, about 3 months at least, where the GP can supervise your consultations and the way you work and provide you feedback. So that's an alternative. Another thing I'd like to touch upon is some pharmacists are unsure about when they can get their IP qualification. So there used to be a requirement that you need to have 2 years of relevant practice. However, I believe the guidelines have changed recently, so that's no longer a requirement for those of you who are wondering. So the requirement for the 2 years relevant practice is no longer there. However, it does depend on the university provider. Not all providers may have adopted this change, so you just have to look at the individual university and check what their requirements are. Another question that I recently got asked about the IP qualification is, if I attain the IP qualification, does it boost your earning potential? So I'd like to touch upon this. It sounds like you've got a lot to say on this, so you can start.
Make no assumptions is all I have to say. Make no assumptions. There is no automatic career progression due to IP, because for the reasons that we've discussed, just because you have an IP, it doesn't mean that you're all of a sudden going to be able to do all these fantastic things. You have to prove to your organization the value that you are going to add. Back in the time when I did IP, we had to actually prove why we needed to do the IP, what value were we going to add, or what service is it that we're going to provide that we're going to apply our IP to, and that was part of the application. You don't have to do that anymore. But the point is still important and it still stands. You were not an IP on Monday, became an IP on Tuesday. What's different? That's what you have to ask yourself. What's different? You're still going to have to learn. You're still going to have to build your competence. You're still going to have to build your confidence, and that's going to take time. So if you want to go in and negotiate, I'm now an IP. I'm prepared to do X, Y, and Z. I think this is worth a little extra X, Y, Z. Have the conversation. That's fine. But don't make the assumption that going in there with an IP is going to get you your salary. You have to prove what your IP is going to bring to the organization. What value is it going to bring? And that value will then equate to any financial reward. At the same time, I would say that pharmacists traditionally have been undervalued and probably don't blow their trumpet enough. Especially when wrong. I would say that if you think you can add value to something, ask about it, prove it, show it, you will see over time how that value is then equated to what we do, and naturally there will be a progression.
The only thing I would add differently, because I totally agree with you, like when you're in a role and you get the IP, it's hard to get that salary increase sometimes. However, it will open doors for pharmacists to apply as an IP for IP roles that are usually advertised for a higher salary. However, in doing that, you are putting yourself in a position where you can say, I'm a prescriber, I can do all these things that you've listed on the job description, and I'm happy to prescribe from the second I get there. So you've got to balance that out. So I definitely think, if you can't get that salary increase where you are now because they don't understand the value of you, but you work hard, train yourself up, are able to then prescribe in the areas that you're competent in, and then you go to apply for a role maybe outside of where you currently work that will pay you a higher salary based on what you can do competently, then that's your other way of kind of using that IP to get a pay rise. Sometimes you do have to jump from place to place, but don't do it without, having the right training and, experience, because that also will kind of put you in a bit of a deep end where you will be expected to just start prescribing, or you might join and say, actually, but I'm not going to prescribe, and that will upset the employers as well. So you've got to just, have that balancing act. But yeah, I would recommend people to do it, but don't do it just for the money, basically. It will give you more money eventually if you work hard enough, but it's not the reason why you're doing it.
It's all about how you navigate it. And things that we forget is, your insurance is going to go up, your indemnity is going to go up, because the risk associated with you as an IP is higher. So even if you go in with that, to negotiate, to say, well, actually, my costs are going to go up because I'm an IP, I need to cover that. If you're going to go in with that as part of the negotiation, then I'd say, but Sarah is right. At the end of the day, it's a tool. But if you're focused on the money, it's probably not the right incentive.
Yeah. Hope that answers your question, Rina. So.
Yeah, there's no, I don't think I have anything to add to that. That was very well answered. Thank you both. And I think just one more point to add to one of the points that were mentioned earlier. So we talked about the fact that if you've got your IP qualification, legally we can prescribe in any area, not just the area that we specialized in during the qualification, but be aware that, CQC and GPHC regulators will need to, they can ask for your areas of competency, and you need to have a portfolio of competency. And this is an area that we actually discussed, I think, 2 podcasts ago. So if anyone hasn't listened to that and you'd like to know more about that, please do tune into that one as well. But I think today we've discussed quite a bit. You've both given us lots of food for thought. Thank you, Amina, for sharing your expertise and insights with us. So yeah, I think that's all for now. So we'll wrap up. Thank you. And thank you, Sarah, as well.
Thank you. It's been great.